Hello, every pony. Here's the thing. I was just sitting around doing a recording for Follow Equestria Project Horizons Chapter 2 when I got an email that I had a comment from DJ Parkasy9592. And please tell me if I'm not pronouncing that right. I, my brain no do work today. And he has a request. He requested that I do one more thing by, is this Brodimus or Brodimus, whichever one. Chapter 1 of One More Thing. Now, I'm going to do this because he or she, I'm not quite sure, can't tell from the name or videos, that, yeah, first request, so I'm gonna do it. So this is Nightlife, giving you One More Thing by Brodimus. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the makeshift stadium erected just outside of Ponyville. It hurt Scootaloo's ears, but she didn't care. She was too excited to worry about anything besides missing what was coming next in the show. And introducing the newest member of the Wonderbolts, Rainbow Dash, performing the infamous Sonic Rainbow. A multicolored streak could be seen approaching the ground. Every pony in the bleachers screamed at the top of their lungs, out of sheer anticipation. Scootaloo dropped her eyes from the sky to find Pinkie Pie a few rows down, jumping around. Oh shit. All of Rainbow's friends were attending her inaugural show into the Wonderbolts. Before she knew it, an ear-shattering boom reverberated throughout from the sky, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. Scootaloo bolted upright. It was still dark in her small room. Tears streamed down her face and her heart was beating faster than she thought possible. As soon as she realized where she was, she started to cry harder and cover her face with a blanket. Oh, by the way, guys, I am doing this as a cold read. I did not read this at all. And it's also tagged with sad and tragedy, if you couldn't tell already. Okay, back to the story. The memory of that horrible event was clear as ever in her mind. The announcer, Pinkie Pie, the sonic rain boom, the dust cloud erupting from the ground, the paramedic ponies, everything. It was Rainbow Dash's first show after she was accepted into the Wonderbolts, and also her last. The Philly Pegasus remembered the funeral. It was cloudy, but didn't rain. Spitfire explained how she tried to stop Dash from doing the rain boom before the show, and afterwards, Scootaloo recalled the loneliness she felt despite being around the rest of Rainbow's friends. Scootaloo was angry at every pony that left. Why did they leave so soon? Equestria lost its best flyer, and they just left like it was no pony important. Bastards. That was me, sorry. All 5 of Rainbow's friends cried. Rarity comforted Fluttershy as she bawled. A pony like her shouldn't have seen something like what happened. No pony should have. What hit Scootaloo the hardest, though, was Applejack and her silent tears. The orange earth pony didn't heave or gasp in sorrow. She retained the same strong aura she always had, but allowed the tears, to still flow over her cheeks. And Scootaloo didn't understand. She was on the ground. Her eyes and throat hurt. She was on the ground. Her eyes and throat hurt from how much she had been crying. Why didn't Applejack feel like her? Scootaloo couldn't stand the sight of the farm pony's strength. Applejack deserved to feel as bad as Scootaloo did. She screamed and yelled to the point of almost losing her voice. Scootaloo remembered Twilight draping a front leg around her, trying to comfort her, but she tore away and ran. She didn't know where she was running, just away from Applejack. Tears fell down her face as she ran. She stopped under a tree in the park and just cried. Why did you have to leave me? 3 months after the funeral were miserable. No, the months after the funeral were miserable. Scootaloo visited Rainbow's grave every day for the first 6 months. She sometimes sat at the site until she fell asleep. Applejack would always come to check on her. She tried to help Scootaloo get home, but the purple-maned filly always glared at Applejack with tear-filled eyes and slunk away. Nothing seemed real. The colors and around her seemed less vibrant. The world was bleaker to Scootaloo. She distanced herself from other ponies, even the Cutie Mark Crusaders. She didn't care about her Cutie Mark anymore. She didn't care about anything anymore. All she wanted was her hero back. Some mornings, Scootaloo would wake up crying and fall into an absolute rage. She'd throw her pillow at her poster of the Wonderbolts, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Why did you have to do it? How could you leave me like that?" Her father would usually let her vent her anger, but would always comfort her later. She didn't listen to him. It was always the same thing. "You can't change what happened, Lulu." Lulu. That's a nice name. That's a nice nickname. She hated it when he called her that. She wasn't a baby anymore. After his failed attempts at comforting his daughter, Scootaloo's father would fly her down to Ponyville. They lived in Cloudsdale, but since Scootaloo couldn't fly on her own, her dad would take her into town. She could have attended the school in Cloudsdale, but he thought it was best for her to attend the school not made up of just Pegasi. He kissed the top of her head and would say the same thing to her every day. "Have fun, sweetheart. Things will get better." And he'd fly to work at the weather factory. Scootaloo had loved her father, but after Rainbow's death she didn't have much faith in any pony. If her hero, no, her idol, could leave her so easily, who's to say others wouldn't do the same? A year passed, but Scootaloo still hadn't healed. She grew and started wearing her mane like Rainbow Dash, and her wings had grown strong enough to carry her weight. But she still felt empty. The rest of the ponies had moved on to some degree. Pinkie Pie was back to throwing parties again, but they seemed to lack the same magic they had before the accident. Fluttershy became even more of a recluse. Sometimes something Scootaloo didn't think possible. Rarity hadn't changed much. She still designed dresses and suits with the same fabulousness as before. Twilight seemed to study more, becoming something of a less dramatic Fluttershy, to the point she sometimes wasn't seen for days. Scootaloo supposed every pony had their own way of coping with loss, except Applejack. Scootaloo hadn't realized it during or after the funeral until a few months later, but Applejack never seemed to smile. Sweet Appleacres wasn't as productive as the family business, and the family business was suffering for it. Apple Bloom helped more after growing so much the past year, but it wasn't near enough to compensate for the family's best apple plucker. As hard as it was for Scootaloo to admit, Applejack might have felt worse than she did. After all, Scootaloo was never really close to Rainbow Dash. But Applejack lost her best friend. The two were nearly inseparable. Now all that was left were the memories and the pain that those carried. The tangerine-colored Pegasus felt her eyes begin to water as she thought. She shook her head so none of the other students in Miss Cheerleady's class would see her crying. Scootaloo still visited Rainbow's grave, but one day it was special. It was the 2-year anniversary of her death, and all of Rainbow's friends were at the site, even Fluttershy and Rarity. Rarity had moved to Manhattan after being employed by Hoity Toity, and didn't have much free time to visit Ponyville. And Fluttershy had been locked in her hut for almost 3 months, not talking to any pony. The memories of Dash and the thoughts of Fluttershy never seeing her again hurt the timid Pegasus to the point of isolation. The young Pegasus looked at the older mares. They all looked the same as 2 years ago, like the passage of time left them alone. Scootaloo had changed a great deal, which was to be expected of a pony nearing her age. Her unkempt purple mane and tail resembled Rainbow as before her death, but still had the curl at the end of each of each to define her. Sometimes, when Scootaloo was flying above Ponyville, she caught Applejack staring at her. She never knew why, and it never bothered her, so she never asked the farm pony of her reasons. After every pony paid their respects and left, she was left alone with Applejack. Scootaloo felt awkward, not about being around the orange Earth pony, but about how she acted 2 years before. "It's all right, Silver Cube," Applejack whispered. I know y'all were feeling angry. I don't blame you." Scootaloo kept staring at the grave marker, touting Rainbow Dash's cutie mark. Applejack sighed and started to walk away. "I've seen you." Scootaloo hesitated. You don't smile anymore. "And I've seen you watch me fly." The blonde-maned pony stopped. "I'm sorry for staring." Scootaloo only turned her purple-hued eyes away from the headstone. I want to know why." She could see Applejack shiver, only enough to be noticed, though. It's 'cause y'all look so much like her." The tangerine-colored Pegasus turned her head at this, but didn't say anything as Applejack continued. "Your colors are different, and you're not as fast as she was, but when I see y'all flying around, I see Rainbow up there." Scootaloo fought back tears. She didn't expect her to say that. You really think so?" Applejack nodded her head, and Scootaloo saw a few drops fall from her face. She had only seen Applejack cry once, at Rainbow's funeral, but this was different. Applejack was almost convulsing as she wept. Scootaloo realized she was crying as well. She always suspected that Applejack felt awful, but she didn't expect her to open up like this. "And the farm pony sobbed, "and I want y'all to know, Rainbow really cared for you. She was gonna help y'all learn to fly, but then she got the letter and Applejack coughed and ended her sentence. During the confusion, Scootaloo had walked up beside Applejack. Or the confession, I'm sorry. She put a front leg around the Earth pony, and the two sat in on the hill under a tree by Rainbow Dash's final resting place. A few weeks after the incident with Applejack, Scootaloo found herself in front of the grave again. The 2-year anniversary hit her hard, and all the memories and regrets had flown back into her mind. She sat silent for some time. "Hey there," she started. "I'm back. I wanted to tell you I'm doing all right. I've gotten pretty good at flying, but I'm nowhere near as good as you were. I'm trying to get into the junior speedsters. If I work hard enough, I think I have a pretty good chance of making it." Silence. Scootaloo knew it was crazy to talk to a headstone, but that never stopped her. She always felt Rainbow could hear her on the other side, no matter what. The grave marker was worn, the cutie mark had started to fade, and moss began to grow around the base of the headstone. Scootaloo brushed it off with a wing before leaving. She hated leaving. It felt like she was turning her back and abandoning someone who needed her, and that never felt right with her. She knew Rainbow wouldn't want her to get stuck and not move forward. Rainbow had always moved forward. She might have been lazy and napped a lot, but she never stopped progressing. Scootaloo said she wanted to be just like her hero, so she always pushed herself. She looked back at the grave. The sunset behind it gave the headstone and tree a halo. Scootaloo smiled, and her eyes watered before she started flying back home. Another year passed, and Scootaloo still visited Rainbow's grave, but it wasn't as often as before. One day, she flew as fast as she could, a letter held tightly in her teeth and tears streaming down her face. She slowed and approached the hill and landed to trot up to the top. The letter fell out of her mouth and folded on the ground. Scootaloo could taste the warm tears as she smiled. "I got in. I'm going to join the Junior Speedsters flight camp just like you did. I'm leaving next month, so I won't be able to visit, though." She cried a bit harder. "I wanted to say thanks," she croaked. Thanks for being an inspiration to me, and thanks for being there. Scootaloo raised a hoof to wipe her eyes. She looked at the moss covering the headstone and faded rainbow-hued lightning bolt. I'm going to be just like you, she whispered. I promise. Over the next couple of years, Scootaloo attended Junior Speedster's flight camp and had made quite a name for herself among the other Pegasi. She finally managed to get her cutie mark on one day that when she tried different stunts for performance. One trick involved using her old scooter. She stood on it, a little awkward seeing as she had grown over the years, and pumped her wings so she bolted toward the ramp. Scootaloo knew the euphoria from flying, but using the scooter as a point of reference felt amazing. The maneuver she went better than she could have imagined, and a purple wheel with wings appeared on her flank when after she landed. Scootaloo almost cried that day. She was so happy. She flew back to Rainbow's grave once the camp ended. It was her last year there, and she had come of age. Scootaloo smiled the entire flight. The headstone hadn't kept well on top of the hill, and the tree had grown to envelop the mound in a massive shadow at noon. Moss covered the entire slab, and Scootaloo had to clean it up in order to see Rainbow Dash's cutie mark. Guess what? She whispered as she turned to where flank was facing the tombstone. I finally got my cutie mark. It's not as cool as yours, but I like it. Scootaloo sat down facing the grave. You know, I'm going to try and get into the Wonderbolts. My coaches at flight camp told me if I worked hard enough, I could make it. And I will. She looked off at the horizon. I promise. I'm sorry, everybody. This... Okay. Let's continue. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the makeshift stadium erected just outside Ponyville. It hurt Scootaloo's ears, but she didn't care. She was too excited to worry about anything besides missing what was coming next in the show. And introducing the newest member of the Wonderbolts, Rainbow Dash, performing the infamous Sonic Rainboom. A multicolored streak could be seen approaching the ground. Every pony in the bleachers was screaming at the top of their lungs out of sheer anticipation. Scootaloo dropped her eyes from the sky to find Pinkie Pie a few rows down, jumping around. All of Rainbow's friends were attending her inaugural show into the Wonderbolts. Before she knew it, an ear-shattering boom reverberated from the sky, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. Scootaloo looked on in horror as the paramedic ponies rushed to the crater. She felt a falling sensation take over her like the world zoomed away from her until she was surrounded by darkness. Hoofsteps could be heard, and they sounded like they were approaching her. Hey, Pipsqueak, a squeaky voice echoed. Scootaloo turned around to see the only other colored thing in the blackness. Rainbow Dash. Dash, but you just... She shouted as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks, but the other mare interrupted her. I'm here now, Scoots, but not for long. I want to tell you something. I may be gone, but if you remember me, I'll never be far away. Got it? Scootaloo nodded her head. One more thing, Dash added. I believe in you. The younger Pegasus looked into Rainbow's light magenta eyes, but didn't say anything. I'm sorry, every pony, but it's just so sad. Okay. Let's see if I can make this. Scootaloo opened her eyes. Tears soaked her pillow. She hadn't woken up crying in a while. The rays from the morning sun seeped into her room through the shades. Sitting up, she wiped her eyes and looked at the picture of Rainbow Dash hanging on the wall next to her Wonderbolts poster. Thanks, Dash, she whispered with a smile. That was the day Scootaloo waited for. After 6 years of letters and one well-performed audition, the Wonderbolts finally accepted her. She recognized all of the most recent members. The Wonderbolts Rainbow admired had all retired and lived across Equestria. Only Spitfire remained as a coach and manager. Scootaloo gathered her bags. Her father helped her prepare. Her first show was the next day, so she was scatterbrained and couldn't focus. "You'll be fine, Lulu," her father said. I know, Dad," Scootaloo responded. He helped her strap the two bags holding her clothes, Wonderbolt's issue jumpsuit, and a picture of Rainbow Dash on before she left. She faced him, almost crying. He smiled at her, on the verge of tears himself. "Just be careful." Scootaloo nodded and left her home in the clouds. The first show went off without a hitch. Scootaloo performed well, as did the rest of the flight team, and the guests at the after party reinforced their feelings of accomplishment. She invited all of her friends, and all of them showed up. Fluttershy and Big Macintosh sat holding hooves on a bench. The two had gotten closer ever since Mac invited Fluttershy after the 2-year anniversary of Rainbow's accident, and later married. Pinky's bright pink mane and tail looked faded from last time Scootaloo saw her, but she was as bubbly as ever. Rarity aged with grace, as every pony expected. The small, fine wrinkles that had begun to form on her once soft face transformed her from a beautiful young mare into the embodiment of elegance. Twilight aged similarly to Rarity, and the pink stripe in her hair faded like Pinky's. Applejack looked as fit as ever, even more so if that was possible. Despite her getting older, she was well toned from continued apple bucking. Scootaloo attributed this idea to Granny Smith's extended lifespan as well. Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle conversed by the punch bowl. The young farm pony's cutie mark exhibited a beautiful apple blossom attached to a wooden plank, and Rarity's little sister's mark was a microphone. Once they discovered what they were skilled at, it wasn't much of a surprise for either of them. Scootaloo smiled at all the ponies, but she had somewhere else to be. She snuck off once she had a minute of peace. The night air was cool and ran through her mane as she flew off. It was dark, but she knew where she was going. The hill and tree were unmistakable, even with little light. She approached what looked like a lump of moss. Scootaloo frowned at the lack of upkeeping as she cleaned the slab so no moss was still attached. The headstone had eroded since her last visit, and the rainbow lightning bolt couldn't be seen in the darkness. "Hey, Dash," Scootaloo said, just above a whisper. "I'm sorry it's been taking so long. Training with the Wonderbolts doesn't allow for much free time. But I guess you'd know that, huh?" Silence. "You know, we're leaving tomorrow, so I—" Her eyes welled as she felt her voice crack as she spoke. "I won't be able to visit much anymore. I have your picture with me, though, so I won't forget you." She wiped her eyes, but they'd stayed dry for only a moment. "Remember that promise I made? I'm going to live my life for both of us. I'm following in your footsteps, Dash. I want to thank you for believing in me." "I'm sorry, everybody. I'm so sorry, but this is okay. Let's go on." She sat in the night air for a while. The only sounds were distant partying and her soft crying. After a few minutes, she stood and turned to leave. "You've done so much for me, Dash, and I want to thank you again before I leave. So thanks." She extended her wings and returned to the party. You excuse me, everybody. I need a moment to gather myself." Okay, I'm back. Let's continue, shall we? Years passed, and Scootaloo had seen many sights and experienced dozens of once-in-a-lifetime events traveling with the Wonderbolts. After she retired, she returned to Cloudsville to live out the rest of her life as a flight instructor. She still visited Ponyville to see Apple Bloom and Sweetie Belle from time to time, but her age eventually caught up with her. After Applejack and Big Mac died, Apple Bloom and her nephew Apple Orchard looked after the farm. Sweetie Belle left Manhattan to travel with her band, and they held an annual concert in Ponyville up until she left to live the quiet life. Ponyville changed after the rest of Rainbow's friends passed away. The town became just like any other, boring and uneventful. Pinky's son, Apple Bob, showed the same amount of enthusiasm as her mother had, and tried to liven the stale town, but unfortunately had the luck of his father, Caramel Apple, and could never put on a celebration like Pinky could. Aw, so they really did get together. Scootaloo liked him. He reminded her of the days when Pinky would throw a party just because she hadn't thrown one last week. But she didn't have time to visit him at Sugarkeep Corner. She guessed he was too busy running the shop on his own anyway. She flew slowly to the hill. The evening stars began to show. If she didn't hurry, she wouldn't be able to see. The old tree had died long before her retirement, a skeleton of its former self. Scootaloo cleaned off the slab in front of the once glorious plant, removing the moss but leaving the flowers that had sprouted along the edges. Rainbow Dash's cutie mark could barely be made out, even during the day, and the headstone had eroded just to surround the picture. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. Scootaloo's voice cracked. Hey Dash, it's me. I know I haven't been here in a few years, but my wings aren't as strong as they once were. She chuckled softly. You know, I kept my promise. I'd travel with the Wonderbolts and live a life for you. A life you would have been proud of. I told my daughter all about you, and how you inspired me to follow my dreams. She's a manager of an up-and-coming flight team in Philadelphia now. And her son is enrolled with junior speedsters. Yeah, the camp's still around. I couldn't be more proud of them. Silence. Scootaloo laid her head down, so her faded purple mane rested on the flower-specked grass. Before I leave, I want to tell you thank you, one last time. I could never have lived such a full life without you. She smiled and let her eyes close. Thank you, Rainbow Dash. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks, but the smile she wore remained. Thank you. I am sorry, every pony. I don't normally read sad fics, and so I if you think I'm crying now, you should see me when I read My Little Dashie. I was bawling halfway through it. I couldn't finish it. Maybe one day I'll read it for you guys. If I get requests for it. But I'm sorry. If this is just such this is such a good story. And this story is from Brodimus or Brodimus or Brodimus or whatever. It's called One More Thing. I know it's a very common name, so just look for Brodimus on FimFiction and you'll find it. Now let's see if I can wipe these tears off and continue reading Fallout Equestria. For now, this is Nightlife signing out. I love you guys.